Welcome back. Now, South Africa has spent almost a third of the year under lockdown, and we are once again facing harsh restrictions. The ban on booze is back. It's mandatory to wear a face mask in public, and a curfew has been reinstated. Well, ministers who serve in the Justice, Crime Prevention and Security cluster of the National Coronavirus Command Council will be outlining the new regulations later on this morning. But for more on what to expect, I'm joined by eNCA's Govan Whittles. And Govan, good morning to you. Let's start with exactly what South Africans can expect from this address.
Well, they can expect some clarity around some of the regulations that have returned, such as the ban on alcohol, but also some clarity around the mandatory wearing of face masks and whether or not there would be any penalties for those in the future, and exactly how the Justice Cluster plans to implement that ban. And then, of course, this briefing is happening in the midst of not only an increasing number of infections, but what appears to be more South Africans not adhering to the lockdown and a new curfew that's been put in place. So we're expecting the cluster to be scrutinized and interrogated on how they plan to police that curfew and make sure that people wear their masks, but also to give some details on the reintroduced ban on the sale of alcohol. Would have seen some speculation that people would be getting some sort of reward for reporting people who are selling alcohol illegally. That's some clarity we're expecting from the ministers as well. But the underlying current here is that the challenges to the government's lockdown and some of the disaster management regulations remain, particularly on FETA's side with the tobacco ban. And we're expecting the ministers to respond to some comments that the government had been unduly paternalistic in implementing some of these disaster management regulations, and that the court, although it had found that the ban on tobacco had been rational, that it had been unduly deferential when giving that judgment, because it had not considered whether it was necessary for the Minister of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs to implement that ban to save lives when it comes to tobacco. So there are a lot of issues that are up in the air. There's a growing sentiment of unhappiness from South Africans because of the lockdown, but there's also a sentiment of more acceptance that people realize they have to stay indoors and accept these regulations to curb the spread of the virus. It'll be interesting to hear the cluster's comments to South Africans on what their attitude should be as we enter this phase of the lockdown.
All right, just speaking on that FETA, issue, Tula Caesar will be having a conversation with the FETA chairperson in this hour, so it will be very interesting to hear what they have to say. But, we heard from the president, rather, during his recent address that, the health, frontline healthcare workers have been complaining about the banning of alcohol, saying it's been putting so much pressure on the healthcare system. Can we expect to hear from, this particular security and justice cluster just on some of the challenges they've incurred since the unbanning of alcohol? This, of course, including some crime and violence stats.
Yeah, we're expecting to hear some statistics on how it's affected the police's deployment in terms of monitoring people who would be buying and consuming alcohol, although people are supposed to consume it at home, so the only real foot traffic would be to the stores to get it and then return to your homes. And we're expecting some feedback, especially from the police minister, on how that ban or unbanning of the sale of alcohol affected their operations and what will happen going forward. But what's also of interest here is exactly how many traffic officers, police, prison warders have been infected with the coronavirus, and how many of them have passed on as these frontline workers that are supposed to be implementing the disaster management regulations. And at the last count, there were thousands of them that had already been affected, and we're expecting a fresh update from the ministers in terms of how that's affecting their ability to continue implementing the lockdown and the regulations that come with it.
Indeed. Well, thank you so much for this update. That's eNCA reporter Govan Whittles.